whoever is remote here. Let me also introduce the colleagues that have been that will contribute and have been contributing in preparation of this. Jovan Kurbalia, Marilia Maciel, Arvin Kamberi will join us with some of the reflections during the briefing, and Sorina Telano and our colleagues Marco and Andriana are helping with preparations and online moderation and the coverage of the regional developments. As I said, this is the first IG briefing in 2020, obviously. We haven't had one at the end of December. We simply wanted to have the easy closure of 2019. Regardless, there were a lot of developments in December as well. Not everyone was celebrating, so we will cover some of the at least late December or key developments in December. I apologize in advance for a little bit of a noise or a voice that you hear with my flu, but then that's the benefit of the remote participation. Besides carbon emission, we also somehow contain the spread of diseases by being remote, so you're safe. I remind you that of the outline of the webinar for those of you that might be new. We'll start with a brief overview of the events in the last month, this time in January and a bit of December. We'll go through the developments of main developments of what we call barometer. What are the key policy developments across the main baskets and issues? And we'll look into the three main trends that we somehow recognized that are being built or developing. At the end, we'll look into what's coming out of the events in the next month in February, and what is there, particularly in Geneva, by the Geneva Internet Platform and Diplo in the next month. There will be space for questions and answers. And at the end of the webinar, we'll have after the global updates, we also have a number of regional updates. So stay with us by the very end. The regional updates are also very, very interesting. Moving to the main events in December and January, and here's what are some of the chosen events. It was quite an intensive period for negotiations related to cyber norms and international peace and security in relation to cyberspace. The two main working committees, bodies under the United Nations, the Open-Ended Working Group and the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts, have both had some of the events in December. The Open-Ended Working Group had a very specific multi-stakeholder informal consultation. This is probably one of the first times in the UN in this setting that there is such an informal multi-stakeholder consultation process. At the same time, the United Nations Group of Governmental Experts had the informal consultations for non-members, because the group is 26 countries, but then for everyone else. And it had its first session held in New York. Besides that, we had the IGF first open consultations, the Geneva Blockchain Forum, and what I would particularly underline, which is just ended a couple of days ago, and there I would already pass the mic to make it more interactive to Jovan. We had the World Economic Forum in Davos, and Jovan was there. As far as I got the feedbacks from Jovan, it was quite again an interesting event. So Jovan, if you have the opportunity to reflect briefly on Davos, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vlada, for this innovation. Why online participation is important. In addition to carbon footprint, it prevents spread of viruses. That's really.
Jovan, seems like your microphone is off. Can you please just check the microphone? Probably it's muted or it's off.
No, it should be fine now. Okay, hello?
Okay. Okay, here. Thanks, perfect.
Okay, good. Just quick update from Davos. Davos has been always very high tech. And from 1996, when John Barlow declared the cyberspace is independent, till what we've discussed this year, that digital space is interdependent. I wasn't in the main conference. I attended a few side events, which are becoming more interesting, according to some Davosians, than the main events. And in the main track, there were discussions on the governance. You heard about AI governance and other issues. I attended event on the digital trust label and the movement to have the new trust security label issued by few universities and Swiss Digital Initiative. And it was very interesting and concrete idea to regain some certainty and trust in digital space. I think that the general shift was towards, let's say, more dystopian developments, although Davos tried to make a balance between both, let's see, blue sky digital developments and more risky. But I think the prevailing tone was on the risks that digital space opens. We will be preparing analysis of all workshops and discussions in Davos. As always, the World Economic Forum announced a few initiatives like Sustainable Data Alliance, Data Free Flow Osaka Track, AI Toolkit, and other details which you can find on the website. Overall spirit, strong concern by companies that something has to be done, and the move towards more regulation and governance. A rather open and clear discussion about concerns that we have in digital space. Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. As always, it seems it was quite a hyper-productive event in Davos with a lot of results coming out. And we'll reflect to some of them, particularly the risks analysis for the forthcoming period. But let's move to the barometer, as we call it, or the pressure in the main areas of digital policy in December and January. Starting with so those of you that have been following, we basically follow the taxonomy that we have developed some years ago and keep updating it. But there are a couple of interesting developments in the relation to global IG architecture and sustainable development. We won't focus much on them now. You can certainly reflect on the newsletter, which will be ready by the end of this week to go into details. At the moment, I'll focus briefly on the cybersecurity level, and here a couple of things that are interesting to underline. Particularly, we will look into the cybercrime resolution and more details in the trends part. There are a couple of developments which are interesting. One was that the NSA has disclosed the vulnerability in Windows 10. Basically, it has reported it to Microsoft. Instead of stockpiling it, it seems to be one of the critical vulnerabilities in Windows 10, and Microsoft has released a patch for that. This is quite a breakthrough. We'll see whether this trend will continue. But there were a lot of discussions, a lot of worries that the governments are, with the valid arguments, the governments are stockpiling the vulnerabilities and exploiting the vulnerabilities in systems around the world instead of reporting them to the vendors so that the vendors could provide a patch. The US has sort of vulnerability, what is known as a vulnerability equity process, developed a couple of years ago, where it sort of balances when it is going to disclose a vulnerability and when not. But this is probably one of the clear first cases where we saw what we can call a responsible behavior by the government to disclose it to Microsoft. It is an interesting positive development. On a more negative side, of course, we continue to see cross-country attacks. An interesting, if we can call it an interesting, sort of a conflict emerged between hacker groups between Turkey and Greece because of the Greece criticism on the Turkey position on Libya. There were some hacker attacks coming from Turkey against the Greek digital infrastructure, and then there was a retaliation by the Greek hacker groups. None of them are officially connected to the governments, but they are politically motivated. that's what we have seen. There were not major blows or major losses or distractions, but it is an interesting, unfortunate sort of a proof that cyber attacks will be more and more used for political conflicts and so on. And then moving to the other part of this security aspect is, again, of course, the 5G and Huawei saga, which is continuing in a way. In the US, we have seen that the US is basically building up its national framework towards secure 5G network, and it basically they adopted a secure 5G and Beyond Act, which sort of directs presidents to develop a more of a strategy, communication strategy. But then we also saw that Belgium is introducing more or higher scrutiny when it comes to 5G equipment, not necessarily linked to Huawei, but indirectly signaling that Huawei equipment might come under a stronger scrutiny in Belgium. Germany is still on the same track as it was, determined to allow Huawei to take part in deployment of 5G infrastructure in the country, and the German Minister of Interior simply didn't want to have Huawei excluded from the 5G project. The major development will be in the UK, where we are expecting probably today the decision by the government whether there will be any changes towards whether there will be any sort of a ban of Huawei. Most of the experts over there say that it is not likely, and the main argument for the split in positions between the US and its allies is that any sort of a pushback on Huawei 5G equipment would actually mean 5 to 10 years of delay in development of 5G and thus Internet of Things and AI in these countries, which is a major blow when it comes to strategic positioning. And on the other hand, that there are ways to minimize the risk either from Huawei or anywhere else by diversifying the equipment. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens in the UK. That might be a very interesting outcome. Moving on to the next topic, basically, e-commerce and internet economy. There have been quite some developments over there related to particularly the gig economy, and I leave it to Marilia to cover or update us a little bit about these developments.
Thank you very much, Vlad, and good day to everyone. I'm speaking with you from the International Cybersecurity Conference that is taking place here in Lille. So excuse me for the occasional noises that you will hear. I'm here for the meeting of the Global Forum of Cyber Expertise. And after that, I'm moving to Geneva for another event on e-commerce. We have a very busy agenda on e-commerce and trade issues in this first semester in the process that is building up until the WTO Ministerial that is going to take place in June. So we can expect developments on this front, not only because countries are accelerating the pace of negotiations in the plurilateral talks that are taking place in the WTO, but also because the upcoming ministerial also encourages other countries that are in the process of discussing regional trade agreements to accelerate their discussions as well. So these 2 months we have selected 2 developments to discuss with you. One of them has been all over the media, which is the conclusion of an agreement, a trade agreement between the United States and China called the Phase 1 trade agreement. This trade agreement is very broad. It has an agenda that encompasses not only the trade in food and agriculture, financial services, intellectual property, technology transfer, but it's also seen as a very welcome development in the context of the trade wars between the United States and China. It's a moment in which the tensions have been released a little bit, and there's a movement towards cooperation. So this agreement is in place. However, there have been some critics on the other side that have said that the agreement is it's not visionary enough, that the most thorny issues between the two countries still remain unresolved, such as, for instance, the issue of subsidies, of state-owned enterprises, And many of the issues related to digital technologies that are foreseen to be upcoming on a second phase trade agreement that both countries are going to discuss in the next months. However, it is a very welcome development. In the digital field, it's interesting that China agreed to some provisions, such as thus not making technology transfer as a condition for market access. We know that many times the Chinese government has said that companies to access the Chinese market, they need to have some technology transfer commitments, and they have agreed not to do that in the bilateral negotiations with the US companies. So it's interesting from a digital standpoint, although that was not ambitious as many would have wanted at this moment. Another development is related to a company and a sector that is always in our developments and predictions and trends, which is the gig economy. There has been some new decisions concerning Uber. First of all, Uber was forbidden to operate in Colombia, and this comes after the ruling of a court as in an instance of appeal. This is a legal proceeding that has been in place since 2016 that was started by an association of taxi drivers. And finally, the second round of appeals have decided that Uber should not be operational in Colombia on the grounds of unfair competition with the taxi drivers. So the company has decided to stop its operations now at the end of January. We have developed a map which you will be able to access in our newsletter, trying to map out the countries in which Uber is banned, is facing a partial ban, or is facing the threat of a ban. We know that many news that have come up with regards to Uber, sometimes it's hard to keep track. That's why we developed this map that explains and tells about how the regulations are tackling the bans on Uber worldwide. Another news concerning Uber is that they have finally decided to start to comply with the Assembly Bill number 5. If you remember, we have discussed this some months ago. It's a bill that has been approved, turned into law in California, that creates conditions for workers of the sort of informal sector to be considered formal employees. And many of the Uber drivers are going to be encompassed in this category of formal employees that create lots of responsibilities for Uber with regards to these employees. So Uber at first said that they would contest the AB5. They are doing that in a legal proceeding. However, this month they have decided to start to comply with the regulation anyway. So they have introduced some changes, giving more power of decision to the drivers when it comes to the rights that they will accept or not, or the fares. And by doing that, they are trying to show that these drivers are actually independent, trying to make sure that they are not encompassed by the AB5 that has been approved in California. Let's see how successful they will be in this attempt, and we're going to continue to follow this development. And if you are interested to take a look at the map, take a look at our newsletter that will be published soon, and you will see a more comprehensive analysis on Uber and how it's going to be regulated in different countries when it comes to being allowed or not to function in different countries worldwide. Over to you, Vlada.
Thank you, Marilia. Thanks for a great overview and for managing to join us. Marilia is in Lille for the International Cybersecurity Conference and the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise regional meeting. Again, the merit of this remote connectivity, we can pick up people from anywhere, including all of you at the webinar. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, though I see many of you, of course, know, is that we have a chat, so at any point you can raise the issue, discuss, and we'll get back to the questions during the Q&A. I see some quite interesting inputs on Huawei case already. Moving on to digital rights, a couple of developments worth mentioning. Facebook launched the new privacy checkup tool, which basically includes who can see what you can share, what you share. So in a way, trying to make you see what the others see. There were some criticisms on that it still does not address the core issues when it comes to social networks. The other one is that Google reached the 7.5 million settlement after the data breach that they have with the Google Plus software bugs. And if the decision is confirmed or approved by the U.S. District Court, that would basically mean that Google Plus users affected by the data breaches could receive between $5 and $12 each. Now that's an interesting calculation to what extent, or what is the value of our data, whether it really goes between $5 and $10 in such cases. Okay, moving on to the next topic. When it comes to the digital rights question, we also have an interesting update that Facebook decided they will not police political ads. So that's an interesting shift, because after a long pressure, there was a long pressure that we discussed in the previous months on many of the platforms to have more sort of responsibility towards the politically related ads. And we have seen positions of Twitter and others which have decided to ban political advertising. Facebook has announced that it will not investigate the truthfulness of the political advertising. And as one of the Facebook representatives said, as people should be able to hear from those who wish to lead them, words and all, that what they say should be scrutinized and debated in public. An interesting different view by Facebook. When it comes to jurisdiction and legal issues, we had a sort of interaction between the FBI and Apple when it comes to unlocking the iPhones in the Florida shooting case. This time, we had the same response by Apple, who said they already helped the FBI agents, but they cannot, or they wouldn't impact the encryption in their phones. But this time, so far, FBI was unable to access the content, even after asking some of the security companies, private technology experts, if they could basically crack the encryption for them. And in the same basket, we had the decision of the Indian High Court, which found the indefinite suspension of the internet services illegal. And as a reminder, there is an ongoing internet shutdown in Kashmir, and basically it's in place since August and affects about 7 million people. So quite an important development. Moving on to the infrastructure basket or set of topics, and there we have, of course, something that is probably one of the major developments in the last 2 months. It's the .org controversy, which continues. We have been discussing whether we should move it as one of the trends already, because it's dragging, but there are still some things to do, some developments to happen. So we'll follow closely and monitor, and it's possible that in February, if the saga continues, we'll address even more time or more focus on .org. But in a nutshell, maybe as a retrospective of what basically happened, for those of you that might not know, .org as one of the top-level domains, which was sort of a public domain offered to the civil society with a price cap with about $10 per .org address. It was managed, it is still managed by ISOC, but ISOC in November announced a deal to sell PIR, Public Internet Registry, which is basically .org registry, to a private company called Ethos Capital for about $1 billion. Now, as with all the major top-level domains, ICANN is the one who has to approve this transition, basically. There are the procedures certainly within ICANN how this is done. Now, ICANN has asked for additional information from peer on what is in plan, and they have published the redacted version. That was something that was discussed by the community, that there are certainly missing parts in what was published by ICANN. But then again, that was probably requested by peer. And there were a couple of letters sent to in this early stage in November already sent to ICANN by more or less either companies or the community in a way, such as the Internet Association and Mozilla, not to go ahead with this transition in a way of .org to the private sector. Some of the main elements of this sort of the peer response to ICANN says that peer will now change from non-profit to for-profit, that it is basically selling the entire stake to the Ethos group, and there are a couple of companies and entities which are related in this structure. Then we saw in the middle of December the members of the US Congress asking questions to with regards to .org, and the responses were provided by ISOC, Peer, and Ethos, including that there will be some forms of community involvement in the future process or the transition process, and as well the community investment fund that will allow to be used for initiatives such as the annual .org awards program and so on. In January, we've seen the 6 members of the US Congress sending a letter to ICANN urging the organization to reject the takeover of .org registry by Ethos. And then in 17th of January, we've seen that ICANN and Peer agreed to have a 30-day extension of ICANN's time to review the Peer submission. Now, the major concerns that stay somewhere in the interaction by the community and the main actors over there is that by moving .org as a sort of a public domain from a non-profit to a for-profit business, that can have a negative impact on .org's public interest mission, that possibly the prices could go up, which would limit the access to .org by civil society in developing countries. There were concerns that possibly the government or the way that the new manager of .org would deal with the government interventions might be more towards or allowing governments to block .org applications by the civil society they might not like. So those are all the various concerns that were raised. Major concern, however, is the process. And that is something that most of the blogs and media coverage, now we've seen some in New York Times and Washington Post, the op-eds and so on, is actually the process which lacks transparency, accountability, and inclusiveness, according to most of the commenters, towards the community. And that is something that was basically the milestone of the multi-stakeholder process in ICANN and ISOC. So that's probably the main criticism that we have to see how it's going to be addressed. What is coming next? What we expect basically is that this 30 days of period, which should expire somewhere mid-February, and that by then we hear the decision by ICANN, and we'll also see to what extent there will be ways to include the community inputs more into this into the decisions. We leave the chat window open for comments and questions. We can certainly get back to this in the Q&A section, and it seems like we'll cover this again probably in even more details in February. Moving on quickly to the last pile of topics which we have here, which is the new technologies. When it comes to the artificial intelligence and Internet of Things, the US White House proposed artificial intelligence regulatory principles. Basically, the regulations and policies related to AI should continue to promote the advancement in technology and innovation while protecting the technology, economic, and national security, privacy, civil liberties in the US, and so on. And we have also seen an interesting call by the Google CEO Sundar Pichai, calling for a sensible AI regulation. So basically, in an editorial to Financial Times, Pichai called for a sensible AI regulation that does not limit the huge potential of the technology when it comes to innovation and the benefit to the society. But there is a need, he noted, to balance potential AI harms with social opportunities. And regulation can play an important role in this regard. So we again see a cautious step forward by the companies towards not necessarily just a self-regulation, but also regulation, but suggesting a light and balanced approach in this regards. And lastly, again, in the US Senate passed the Developing and Growing the Internet of Things Act, where it basically focused more on the strategic aspects of development of the IoT. That was a brief coverage of the key issues in the previous month. And now let's look into the 3 trends that we sort of selected. It was not easy to select. We had a number of ideas. But the key trends that we saw in, let's say, December and January. And we'll start with the first one, which is a decade of action, sort of how an interrelation between the technology and the SDGs and climate and all these broader discussions. And there I pass the floor to Jovan to elaborate a bit more on this one. Jovan, the floor is yours.
The address on the announcing the process towards the UN General Assembly meeting, which will celebrate 75th anniversary of the UN. In his address, it was clear that the 2 pillars are a question of, let's say, nature and digital, or environment and digital, or climate change, more focused on digital. It was also the main focus of the speech of the President of the European Commission in Davos. Therefore, there is this sort of 2 legs of global digital policy, one dealing with nature and environment, the other dealing with the digital and virtual issues. And that will be probably converging around the question of SDGs and Agenda 2020. It was announced that this is the decade of action. As well, that's sort of probably additional action, because there were supposed to be actions in the past as well. And probably that interplay between natural and the digital ecosystems will be quite important in the coming months. We will have the IGF in Katowice, which also hosted the COP in 2018. And there will be also quite a few activities. There is Digital Ecosystem Initiative by UNEP, or trying to make linkages between 2 spaces around the Agenda 2030. It's more related to people who are involved in policy processes, but it is worth putting on the policy radar as a possibly new framing of digital discussions, going outside traditional issues and more shifting towards environmental and climate change concern in all aspects, with regard to the carbon footprint, with regard to policies, with regard to use of SDGs, for example, for guiding the digital developments of artificial intelligence, which is often underutilized. We often speak about use of AI to implement SDGs, and rarely we discuss use of SDGs to guide the developments of AI, because SDGs are probably the most operational condensation of core values and priorities of humanity, and quite concrete. Therefore, there will be many interplays in that realm of environment, sustainable development, and digital ahead of us. Over to you, Vlada.
Thank you, Jovan. This is certainly something that will be a much longer-term trend, so we will be getting back to that from time to time. Moving on to the yep. Sure, go ahead.
Well, the third point in this interplay is more practical and tool-oriented, use of online tools for conducting international meetings and consultations, and we are using one of these tools now. Tomorrow we'll have a Geneva Engage event. There is open invitation to all of you to join in situ in Geneva or online, where we'll discuss online participation as a new modus operandi of multilateral diplomacy. And that's emerging with the request, for example, by Swiss government to reduce air traveling for 30% till 2030. Many governments are considering these options because it is becoming a realistic concern an initiative to use more online participation, e-conferencing in multilateral diplomacy. Over to you.
Thanks, Johan. And I was basically joking at the beginning of the webinar because I do have a flu, but the truth is, with all the coronavirus things and so on, and the health issues in general, remote participation might be something that can, in worst cases, help with preventing the spread of diseases as well. So that's something that we can take into consideration. Okay, moving on to certainly we can get back again to this question if you wish at the Q&A part. Moving on to the second trend of the well, let's say January and December, even though the development was really in December, it was end of December, it was that the UN General Assembly adopted the Russian proposed and China-backed resolution on combating cybercrime, which basically establishes a committee to prepare a global convention, a possible global convention on cybercrime. Now, this is something that has been around for quite some time. In November already, the third committee of the UN has adopted the resolution. Now, at the end of December, the General Assembly has also adopted it. But what is interesting is that certainly all the focus on cybercrime will be something that we'll be discussing in the next months more and more, in this relation between the existing mechanism of Budapest Convention, which is not fully international because it's Council of Europe one, but it is accepted by over 65 and ratified by over 65 countries, 20 plus of them not being members of Council of Europe, but the global community. But the other question is actually that after the Russia proposed and China-backed resolution on open-ended working group in 2018, which in a way was seen as confronting or duplicating possibly the efforts of the group of governmental experts. Now we see another resolution which has gone through the General Assembly, in a way proposed and pushed by the other group of states, if we can call it that way, in this sort of a polarized environment. What is new when it comes to the global convention? Let's say when it comes to cybercrime, there are arguments why this possible new convention might be needed. The arguments of the proponents are that Budapest Convention, as I mentioned, is developed by the Council of Europe states. So those that are not members of the Council of Europe did not have a say. Even some of the members of Council of Europe, like Russia, had not ratified and signed and have a reservation about parts of that. The other argument is it's old. It's from 2001, and that it's in that sense it's not global. Now, on the other hand, as I said, it is signed not only by almost all the Council of Europe states, but about 20 of non-members. There are some renovations underway, work on the additional protocol and so on. But in addition, what's probably the most relevant when it comes to the Budapest Convention is it has, and the Council of Europe itself, they have a track, a capacity building track that helps countries, even those that have not signed and ratified, with the training of judicial institution, improvement of the legal environment, and so on. So definitely there are many benefits. There are some criticisms on part of the Cybercrime Convention in relation to sovereignty. Now, concerns on the other hand, particularly by the US and European Union and the Western partners, and it was explicitly expressed after this resolution went through in late December, is that what they say, what the US and the EU say, there is no global readiness in a way, there is no critical mass for agreement on a possible new mechanism. There is already an existing expert group within the UN dealing with cybercrime issues, including discussing whether there is a need for a convention. More importantly, what they worry or warn is that the proposed draft convention could undermine the use of internet to exercise human rights and freedoms. Particularly, what they mention is that the states could now criminalize freedom of expression or some other sort of politically inappropriate behavior, and use the global mechanism to combat the free speech. In a nutshell, why we are seeing this sort of a change in the voting in a way, or that more and more, let's say, we have now two dots at least, the open-ended working group, and now this one, that the governments are more and more inclined towards at least discussing a possible global convention. Well, there is a number of reasons that we can see. Cyber is definitely higher on the agenda than ever, and it's popping up more and more in the General Assembly, in the committees as well, and more countries are taking their positions, whatever the positions are. Then small and developing countries are becoming more interested in cyber because certainly they see an impact on economy and national security, but they also, some of them also see the leverage that the possible global convention could bring on controlling the national security in sense of political censorship and so on. Then many of the countries, particularly the swing states and the small and developing countries, don't necessarily have a clear single national position. You have a bunch of experts dealing with cybercrime, for instance, but then you have diplomats which are in New York, and they're not necessarily connected. There is no necessarily a single position. And we did an analysis of the voting, which will publish in a couple of days. And the voting comparison, for instance, shows that there are countries which have ratified the Budapest Convention. In particular, 6 of them, 3 of them being members of Council of Europe, which have still voted for this resolution pushed by Russia. So we could say that either they have not consulted their own experts, or they simply are playing a bigger game of negotiations and bargaining chips, where cybercrime is just one of these chips. Some countries have changed their mind. There is a dozen of countries that voted or became against or abstained between the third committee and the voting. So there was definitely a sort of a push by the big players, in this case particularly the US and EU, on their partners to withdraw the support. So we saw some 10 less votes during the GA voting. And then there is over 40 countries that have simply voted for yes for everything. For the open-ended working group resolution, for the group of governmental expert resolution, and for the cybercrime resolution. So there is a bunch of states, over 40, which probably simply take it. It's easier to say yes for everything, and we'll see what we are going to do, because we will be involved. Again, there were criticisms that there are big guys which are pressing the smaller ones in various ways, the trade, economies, subventions, and so on. And that's something that's probably happening, and we have been seeing that in the past on all sides. What is a positive sign is that we have seen for the first time, as I mentioned at the beginning, the open-ended working group open consultations with the over 130 NGOs and organizations that have participated, and it remains to be seen whether these inputs will be fed into the process of open-ended working group, and whether in any of these future processes, including the work related to cybercrime, we will see more of the involvement and consultations with other stakeholders. And then I leave it open as a question, and I see Jovan has raised the hand, whether this pendulum is moving towards more of the inclination of states to look for global treaties on cyber. Jovan, you wanted to reflect also.
So cybercrime, there is a need, I would say, people who are today in the room, or academic community, or events, to think of some smart solution for this double track approach which is emerging, because de facto a lot of cybercrime regulation has been influenced by the Budapest Convention. It was the first one. It proposed concrete solution. Many countries introduced the solution from Budapest in their national laws. Now, and there are legitimate concerns of some countries that they were not part of the negotiating. Probably there is a way to bridge these two approaches, especially when it comes to the formal, not substantive concerns. When it comes to substantive political concerns, they're much more difficult to overcome. But when it comes to the question of legitimacy participation, one could think of some UN-led framework which could include the Budapest Convention and have just updated the rules which are needed, but having also countries using the UN framework and some sort of smart solution by combining these two approaches. And another last point is that there is a global convention, which is Palermo Convention Against Organized Crime, which is completely underutilized. It is signed by, I think, more than 160 member states, and most of cybercrime is organized crime, crossing the national borders and involving more than, I think, three persons or three entities. Therefore, there are tools, there is a need for a bit smarter solution which could create convergences in the areas where there are no political differences. When there are political differences, it's a question of negotiation and this thing. But I'm really convinced that there is a space to create these convergences and to maintain the unified internet, because there are increasing number of divides. You have two security tracks, you have division in WTO, this is now emerging division, and I don't think it's healthy for multilateralism and for the internet in general. Over.
Thank you, Jovan. Okay, moving on to the third trend. Digital currencies, again in the focus. And Arvin, I pass the floor to you.
I will try to be really short because we're already 10 to 1. So, of course, last autumn, with the launch, after the launch of, or talks about the launch of Libra, Chinese government actually announced they work on their own digital currency, digital yuan. And that development actually triggered a lot of responses globally, worldwide. And all of the, I hope you can hear me better now. Okay, that's better. Yeah, my microphone is down. So in that light, after announcement of China's digital currency, many national banks and national financial institutions actually try to mimic this and try to think about the new ways how primary emission for money is going to be handled. From the last month, we had two big announcements. First is from WEF. They announced the global consortium for digital currency governance. That will be an international multi-stakeholder initiative composed of companies, financial institutions, government representatives, tech experts, academics, etc. It was announced on the previous on a web forum that just finished. Talks and central banks which are inside these talks are Central Bank of Egypt, South Africa, Kenya, and Singapore. So this is the one initiative which will try to set guideline principles to support public and private actors exploring opportunities offered by digital currencies. Another major group was created last month, only 10 days ago, under the umbrella of Bank of International Settlement. Groups of 6 national banks, which is Bank of England, Bank of Canada, Japan, Sweden, Swiss National Bank, and the European Central Bank, actually start working on a group which will be under the umbrella of Bank of International Settlement Innovation Hub. They will also look at the potential cases for central bank digital currencies and digital currencies that will be issued by a central bank. This group, the second group, particularly said that they will rely with Financial Stability Board and Committee of Payments and Market Infrastructure, two global bodies that are actually overviewing the financial flow in global finances. So as an overview update from December and January, we can say that central banks are now seriously looking at technology and at ways how can primary emissions or central bank's money, like as we know it, turn it to a digital form, not just like an e-money, but actually having an advanced blockchain and other systems on which we can develop further. So basic uptake from December and January. Central banks are working on versions of digital currency for their perspective currency. Vlada, over to you.
Thank you, Armin. It's interesting. We are occasionally really back to the question of digital currencies, and we'll definitely continue to do so. Okay, before we move to the regional updates, what's ahead of us, particularly in February, a bunch of interesting events, certainly some which are quite famous, like Munich Security Conference. We'll hear more on cybersecurity, the Human Rights Council. One relevant cybersecurity event is certainly the second substantive session of the OpenAI Working Group in New York. As always, we'll be reporting from this. So we have been reporting from the first two meetings and the open consultation. So we'll do also reports from this second substantive session on the Digital Watch platform. And that's more or less when it comes to the event in February. I don't know, Jovan, if you want to add anything on this one or on the Geneva and GIP ones.
I can add, yeah, definitely on Geneva. This week, if you are in Geneva, tomorrow you can come for the Geneva Engage event and award, which usually focus on social media, use of Twitter, Facebook, and other tools. This year, our focus will be on online conferencing and online participation. Therefore, between 4 and 6 at the Geneva Internet Platform in WMO building. On Thursday, during the lunchtime, we will have a meeting on the developments in 2020, some sort of crystal ball exercise only for in situ participants who are in Geneva. In February, we start Road to Bern activities in the build-up for the World Data Summit, which will be held in October this year in Bern. There will be 4 events covering different aspects of data policy. The first one will be on the 19th of February, organized by 2 organizations, the World Meteorological Organization and World Health Organization, on the way how they collect data. Later on, there will be events on managing data, securing data, and using data. Those events will be basically organized throughout the spring until the summer. The idea is to have Geneva input into the World Summit discussion, especially around the questions such as use data as a commons, data as a public good, protection of data, and other issues which are in the focus of the international Geneva and international organizations. Over to you.
Thank you, Jovan. Well, the reminder as well that we have the newsletter is coming by the end of this week, hopefully. So you have the review and the barometer and all these details in the newsletter on the Digital Watch website. We have an interesting web debate on 4th of February, Diplomacy at the UN, with a provocative title is Multilateralism Dead, which is, by the way, similar to the main topic of the Munich Security Forum, so there'll be some links. And our next digital policy briefing is on 25th of February. Moving to the Q&A before the local hubs, but since we basically responded to a couple of questions, most of them were the reflections and additions to our updates, and thank you for all of that. The ones on Facebook, the ones on 5G and so on, the ones on cybercrime resolution. Thanks for that. You can run through the chat. I'm passing the floor now to Andriana For the regional updates, we have regional updates from Asia, Caribbean region, Middle East and North Africa region, and Africa. And it's quite interesting to see what are the specific concerns of the month in across the world. They are usually quite different. Andreana, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vlada, and thank you, colleagues, for the roundup of developments in the past month. Thank you to the audience for your questions. And let's just dive right in. First up, we have Amrita Chowdhury with updates from Asia.
Hello.
On the US-China trade deal, and then on the Supreme Court of India decision on internet shutdowns and other developments from the region. Over to Amrita.
Hello and welcome to the regional update from Asia for the month of January. This month witnessed United States and China signing the Phase 1 US-China trade deal. While this deal is expected to help in de-escalating the ongoing trade war between the two nations, however, critics claim that the agreement fails to address structural problems in the bilateral trade relationship and ignores some of the trickiest aspects of the US-China trade disputes, such as subsidies for the China's state-owned enterprises. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court of India has pronounced that the indefinite internet restrictions in Jammu and Kashmir are against the constitution and illegal. The court, however, gave the government a week's time to review the shutdown. In China, to boost the efficiency of internet courts, the Supreme People's Court has introduced a pilot program. For the first time, Singapore's fake news law, the Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation Act, POFMA, has been challenged in the court by the Singapore Democratic Party. And now news on cryptocurrency. In South Korea, the South Korean Presidential Committee on the Fourth Industrial Revolution has proposed to the government to institutionalize cryptocurrency in the country. On the other hand, the Reserve Bank of Australia, in a submission to the government, has expressed doubts over the demand of cryptocurrency in the current form in the country. In Japan, an education institution, Meijo Gakuin Educational Corporation, has been charged for misappropriating funds and investing it in cryptocurrency. That's all for this month. Thank you.
Thank you, Amrita. And now we move to Africa. We have Grace Mutungu, who will tell us more about the UK-Africa Investment Summit and the major leak of confidential documents now called Luanda Leaks.
Welcome to Updates from Africa. The year has just started on a money note. On 20th January, there was the big UK Africa Investment Summit, and African fintechs reaped big. The UK government, through UK Aid, committed £320 million to be used to support programs that are tackling extreme poverty and also promoting financial inclusion. This money will support already existing programs and also start new programs under the financial sector deepening in countries like Ethiopia, Ghana, and also the West African Monetary Union. Another money story that is breaking the internet in Africa is Luanda Leaks, which is an internet leak containing over 715,000 documents that expose Africa's richest woman, Isabel dos Santos, for financial impropriety and economic crimes. Now, this investigative journalism was coordinated by over 36 media houses and over 120 journalists, and it has led to indictment of Dos Santos and the Angolan Attorney General is now taking steps to repatriate her so that she can face charges. And to a more cultural, nuanced story is that 29 uniquely Nigerian English words have been added to the Oxford English Dictionary, thanks to the spread of Nigerian pop culture, especially on the internet. So if you're going to Lagos or Abuja anytime soon, better consult your Oxford English Dictionary to find out what they mean when they tell you, see you next tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Grace. We have Hanan Boujani now with updates from the Middle East and North Africa. Hanan will tell us more about Dubai's plan to launch largest crypto valley and the 5th edition of the Arab Internet Governance Forum, which will be held in.
Good afternoon. My name is Hanan Boujani, and I will be bringing to you Diplo briefings for the month of January 2020. To start with, the Dubai Multi Commodities has announced a partnership with CVVC to launch the largest crypto valley in the world, which is an ecosystem that will include DLT firms, blockchain, and cryptographic initiatives. The agreement was signed on the margins of the World Economic Forum in Davos, and the two entities plan to develop the ecosystem in Jumeirah Lakes, where there's already over 17,000 companies that are registered. The collaboration is basically designed to foster growth and integrity across the global blockchain economy. It will offer a variety of services, including incubation for early stage startups, co-working facilities, innovation services for corporate clients, and training, education, events, mentoring, and funding. Finally, the 5th edition of the Arab IGF took place in Cairo this week. The meeting is championed by UNESCO, the League of Arab States, and is hosted by the Arab Administrative Development Organization, which is based in Cairo. The objective of the Internet Governance Forum in the Middle East is to foster dialogue among the relevant stakeholders on policy issues that are relevant to the Middle East and North Africa. And the topics ranged from cybersecurity to women empowerment and the role of the internet in digital transformation. Thank you very much for your attention, and see you soon.
Thank you, Hanan. At the end, we will hear from Wanda Perez with updates from the Caribbean region.
Hello, everyone. Wishing you a very prosperous 2020. An interactive online map of Puerto Rico was created as part of a larger project supported by the Pulitzer Center regarding property rights and vulnerability in that country. This project looks at the effects of economic and environmental vulnerability in 3 areas of Puerto Rico: Santurce, Loiza, and Vieques. Each of these areas is engaged in a different struggle to secure land tenure and property rights. The data mapped with this project includes demographic data from the U.S. Census, foreclosure data from Puerto Rico's Office of the Commissioner of Financial Institutions, and others useful informations. On the other hand, a national public key infrastructure project was launched last January 15 in Jamaica. The project will be rolled out during the next 7 months with the objective of making Jamaica a more digital society in which there is a ubiquitous use of information and communications technology in all spheres. It is part of the government's national identification system. One of the first solutions that the Public Key Infrastructure Project is focusing on is the delivery of electronic passports, e-passports, as part of the transformation process taking place at the Passport, Immigration and Citizenship Agency. Thank you for your attention. This is all.
Thank you, Wanda. Thanks again to Amrita, Grace, Hanan, and Wanda for sharing the updates from their regions. This brings us to the end of our January 2020 briefing.
Thank you, Andriana. As always, quite interesting review of regional perspectives, and sometimes we forget the specificities of the use of the internet and the challenges that we see on the local level. I particularly like the Nigerian development of the new terminology and new words. Thank you a lot for joining. A reminder that this month's Geneva Digital Watch newsletter will be available for download on the Observatory and Digital Watch by the end of this week at dig.watch/newsletter. Thank you all for participating today. See you again on Tuesday, 25th of February. And particular thanks to Jovan, Arvin, Marilia, Andriana, Serena, Marco, Mina, and all the team behind the briefing. See you on 25th of February. Bye-bye.